Where are the Mara McCummins? Is Johnny send these out?
Yeah,
On WhatsApp.
It's on the mailing.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I'm getting there. Yeah, it should have gone out in the mailing. Did it go out in the mailing? I'm going to leave it plain. Okay, so did it go out in the? Yeah, everyone's got it. Okay, fine. So there was a slight confusion with the timing. I'm sorry. It was supposed to be the share at 1:45 rather than 22. It's a bit. We'll get it right. So basically, this particular sugya about omens and superstitions, like all of these, is a very big topic, and we won't be able to cover all of it. But there is a very, very interesting and important machlokas rishonim that surrounds the Gemara in Chulin, the story in the Gemara in Chulin. I decided this time, because to give people a chance to, if they want to look at the Mara Makomas during Shabbos, the sources, I decided to also put the English. I hope that was helpful. I don't know. I figure those who wish to ignore the English because they don't need it can ignore it, but those it's useful for, it would be helpful. Basically, what we have here is the connection to the parsha is of course with Eliezer at the well, the first source of and she says, drink, what must you say? So the Eliezer says, simple test. I'm going to see whether she's the right one, because if I say to her, drink, she goes, drink, we know that she is the right one. And although this seems a little bit innocuous, if you look at it, it seems to be a reasonable thing to do, a reasonable test. The truth is that there are lots of issues, as we'll see, particularly with the second Gemara that we'll look at. This is particularly cited potentially as an issue of omens and of using an omen in order to divine the future. That's the issue here. The question is, how does the Gemara define someone who practices divination? We know that the psukim in Parshas Shoftim discuss the particular issues around onein or menachesh, someone who tries to divine the times, and someone who you sort of like works in various tries to work out the future through various possible dubious methods. And these are described in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says like this. Menachesh. What is a menachesh? The enchanter in the pasuk in Devarim. That's someone who takes a superstitious sign. Someone says, my bread fell out my mouth, or my stick fell out my hand, or whatever, and says, that's a bad sign. Or Beno Kurelo Ma'achorov, he takes this bad sign because his son called him from behind. Svisko Baderech, a deer interrupted him on the way. Nochash Mimino Veshuel Mismolo, there is a serpent on the right and a fox on his left. Or he says something totally different. In other words, and he takes that to mean that he should change what he was planning to do. Or it could be that someone says to someone who's collecting tzedakah, he's saying, Al taschil bi, don't start with me. Shachar, or he said, I don't want. That's a bad sign. If you start collecting tzedakah from me first, I think of some other reasons people might not want to be the first. But if you collect from me first, he says that's a bad sign. I don't want that. That's not good. Or he says, don't collect from me because it's shacharis, the morning, or a shchodesh, it's Shabbos. So all these, these certain times, I don't consider them to be auspicious times for me. That is also the problem. That is also a problem. And similarly, there's another brisa there as well. You shouldn't practice divination nor soothsaying. That's how it's translated. You go in someone who tries to look at what happens to any of these animals, weasel, birds, or fish, and sort of says, well, they're going in a particular direction, and that should influence my behavior. So all these things are not allowed. All these type of things are frowned upon. Now, this idea, of course, of superstition in general is still is very, very prevalent. It's very prevalent. Some people, for example, someone might ask the following shaila. They might say, in the middle of negotiating a business deal, and some quirk accident happens on the way to the meeting. So should they take that as some sign to avoid the deal, right? All these type of questions, these type of things like signs and that sort of thing. But what it really boils down to in terms of the interpretation of signs, and this is where it gets back to the question about Eliezer, right? I say you obviously have the black and white stuff here, which is clearly not allowed, right? Like basing yourself on something like a mirror breaking or walking under a ladder and all this stuff. You're not allowed to. It's clear. You're not allowed to sort of say that's bad luck and therefore I won't do what I was planning or something like that. That's not allowed. It's completely forbidden. But the question is, what about these sort of gray areas? And as where people try and take things as a sign either way, is that allowed or not? And we have a fascinating story in the Gemara in Choleh. Rav Chanan Chasone. Rav was going to the house of Rav Chanan, his son-in-law, and Chazi Mabra to Kosilape. He saw a ferry coming towards him, and he said, "Oma Mabra Kosilape, a ferry is coming towards me. Even I didn't plan on this ferry, and suddenly it's here at the right time, just when I want to cross the river. Yom Tavalagov, it's going to be a good day. Wherever I'm going to, I know things are going to go well for me. The day has started off well. We've all been in that sort of situation. You think, that's a good start to the day." So Rav says, the ferry was waiting for me on the right side of the river. I don't have to wait for the crossing for the next 2 hours. This is great news. And then what happened was Ozal Kam Abova. He went and stood at the gate of Rav Chanan, his son-in-law's house, and Odik Bebizo de Dasha, and he looks through a crack in the door, and Chazich Yosef Italia, he saw an animal that was hanging. It was ready to be cooked. In other words, it was ready to be it was ready to be cooked. And what did he do? Toraf Abov, he knocked on the door, knocked on the gate. Everyone came towards him. Also Tabchinami. And the butchers also came. Now, what did Rav do? Lo alim Rav einemine, right? He didn't take his eyes from the meat. He was worried about the problem of what's called basashnis alim in ha'ayin. Just hasn't been supervised. The entire is a kashrus. What he was, and that was what he was worried about. And he says that to them and he said to them, he said that had I not come now, and had I not kept an eye on the meat, you would have ended up eating, giving forbidden meat to my daughter's children, because I was the only one watching. Everyone came to greet me, and no one was keeping an eye on the meat. It was a good thing that I was keeping an eye on the meat. Now, the strange thing then, the Gemara takes an unusual twist. The story takes an unusual twist at that moment, because it says, Lo ochol Rav mi'ahu bisra. Rav didn't eat from meat. So the Gemara's got a problem here. What's the reason that he didn't eat from the meat? He's just saying to them that had it not been for me, the meat would have been forbidden, because it could have been the problem of basashnis alim min ha'ayin, meat which no one's watched over, is a concern that maybe it's exchanged for something that was treif. He says it's fine because I've looked after it, and yet he doesn't want to eat the meat. So what's the reason? The Gemara says, my time, what was the reason he didn't eat from it? If it was because of taking his eye off the meat, he hadn't. He'd kept an eye on it. Elo de nochesh. The problem seems to be to do with divination. He had divined. He saw the ferry as the good omen, right? We said that at the beginning, right? He saw the ferry as a good omen. And as a result, he didn't want to follow, it seems, that path and say, therefore, I'm going to have consumed the meat, because he took that as a good sign. Says the Gemara, the problem is, Rav himself said, any divination, any form of divining, which is not like Eliezer, the servant of Avram, or like Yonasan ben Shaul, the case of Eliezer we've already mentioned. In the case of Yonasan ben Shaul, was where it's in Shmuel Aleph, where basically he had a situation where they were massively outnumbered, and he said to his armor bearer that basically if they come, I think it was something like this: if they come towards us, then we know it's a good sign we're going to win, even though we're massively outnumbered, right? That was another type, a similar type of situation. He took that would be a good sign that we're going to be victorious. But Rav said anything that's not like they did is not called divination at all. So therefore, why was it that he was penalizing himself, if you like, for relying on this omen. He seems to be saying that it's not a problem at all. We'll come back to that line in a minute. The Gemara answers and says it was a totally different reason. It was an optional meal. It was a feast that wasn't to do with a mitzvah. And Rav had this principle of Rav lo mishani mitzvahs or reshus. Rav didn't want to benefit from a meal that wasn't for a purpose of a mitzvah, and therefore he had this personal stringency. He didn't want to take part in it. So it was a totally different reason. But the question here is, and this is where it comes to a fascinating machlokas rishonim as to how to understand this Gemara, is what exactly is the issue? What exactly is the issue with the case of Eliezer and Yonasan? What does the Gemara mean about divination at all? So basically, most Rishonim learn that, and it's best found actually in the Rambam. The Rambam is in Hilchos Avodas Kechovim, Perek Yud Aleph, Halacha Hey. And the Rambam says, and it's not only the Rambam, I think it's also Rashi and Tosfos learn like this as well. He says like this. 1 second, let me just find it. Yeah. Yeah, so he says, the Rambam learns that any situation, he says, a person creates any type of sign for themselves. If this happens to me, do a certain thing. In other words, if X happens to me, I'll do Y. Whatever the X is, right? You make up something yourself, right? I'm going to base my course of action on the basis of something that happened to me, right? That's whatever it is. He says, and if it doesn't happen, lo yas, I won't do. Any situation like that, like Eliezer did. So in fact, how Eliezer acted and how Yonasan, the son of Shaul, acted, in any situation like that, he says that is always forbidden. Any situation like that is forbidden. And anyone who does anything of that nature will get malchus. He gets lashes for doing so, because that is what is included in this idea of being menachesh, of divining. Even if you make it up, you make it up yourself. Okay. So this is how the Rambam learns. Now, according to the Rambam, how do we understand what this Gemara meant, what this Gemara means? So the Gemara means very simply that the only problem that the Gemara's question on Rav's actions, why Rav didn't eat from the meal, was what Rav himself said, that the only problem is when you base your actions, on, right, the course of your decision. Rav wasn't relying on the omen in his decision, in making any decision. And therefore there was nothing forbidden about it. There was nothing forbidden about it. In other words, because he did not act as Eliezer did, where he based an action on the basis of a sign, there was no problem with it. That was the Gemara's question, right? That any situation where you say, because of X, I'm going to do Y, it's a problem. Now, the obvious question on the Rambam and Rashi and Tosfos and all the others, and many Rishonim who learn like this, how could Eliezer's actions be justified, right? That's the obvious question. You're saying that he did something that wasn't allowed, and how can you justify that? So this is dealt with in a number of ways. Tosfos there on the Gemara deals with it by saying that he holds that he didn't actually give her the bracelets until she said who she was. So he wasn't actually basing it on the basis of what the sign was. Others give other explanations as well. I once heard a beautiful idea from Rav Hirsch, which was that this whole idea Eliezer wasn't a case of, the reason why he was allowed to do it was because it was to do with he was looking simply to see whether she was a Baalas Chesed. It wasn't really an omen at all. He was simply seeing if she would do Chesed. The problem with that, of course, is that the Gemara does pull it out as an omen. That's the problem with that explanation, which may be why Tosfos doesn't like it and seems to say that he had reversed the order. He was only actually giving her the jewelry until she said who she was. Problem, of course, with that is that the pasuk says it the other way around. Okay, but anyway, that's how they do it. And with and they give another explanation as well with Yonasan. It is difficult in terms of how to explain how they acted in that way, but that's what they say. But there are other Rishonim who disagree with the whole premise, and they say like this. They says, and the Ravid puts it very clearly. The Ravid in his commentary on the Rambam says, "Zeh shibush gadol." He says it's a big mistake. It's completely permitted, he says, for a person to say, such and such a thing happened to me, and therefore I think I'd rather not do this or do this, right? He says that's all okay. He says that's fine. And he says maybe the Rambam was confused, the Ravid could say this, because of this phrase in the Gemara, which we just learned, that any divination that isn't like Eliezer or Yonasan thing is not a divination. So he thought that was saying that meant that those type of, that it's talking about whether it's allowed or not, And he says that's not true. That's not what the Gemara mean. That's not what the Gemara meant. It's just saying that it's not useful. It's just not helpful. It's just not a useful thing. It doesn't work. It's talking about the practicalities of it. It's saying that a divination that is not like Eliezer and Yonasan, this type of divination, is just not helpful. It doesn't work as a sign, right? But it's not saying that it was something not allowed with it. He says, how can that be? How could the Rambam think that Eliezer and Yonasan, the son of Shaul, were engaged in prohibited activities? You with me, right? In terms of divining and taking signs. No. It must be, he says, that what they did was perfectly permissible. And the Gemara, you read the Gemara, not about what is allowed and what is not allowed, but simply whether it's useful. Does it work or not? But not that it's not allowed. So what is not allowed, according to the Ravid, according to the Radak, also learns like this. It's only things that are based on superstition, known superstitions, or sorcery, or idolatry, or things like that. That's what it's talking about. That's what he's talking about. Okay, to base a decision on something that has no superstitious value, so to speak, right? That, according to the Radak and the Ravid, is not a problem. Are you with me, right? So for example, according to these Rishonim, if you make your own decision in the morning, you get up in the morning and you say, like the case of Rav, the boat was on the right side of the river. That's a good sign. I better go and seal a deal today, right? According to the second set of Rishonim, the Ravid, that's absolutely fine. According to the Rambam, no. You can't make any type of signs for yourself, right? You cannot base your actions even on made-up signs. Are you with me, right? That's the machlokas here. It's a very interesting machlokas because it's how to understand the Gemara, but also because it allows us to see how this feeds through into the practical halacha. The final sources that I brought you, the penultimate sources that I quoted to you on the sheet, we don't have to go through both of them. The first one was basically a repetition of what we saw in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, so we don't have to go through that, right? This is in Shulchan Aruch Yeridea, Siman Kufay and Tes. The first one, Sif Gimel, was basically going through, all the different examples of dodgy practices, like the black cats and the ladders and the whatever it is, the snake in front of my bar, snake or the fox on his left. All this stuff, by the way, everyone agrees is not allowed, right? These are the classic superstition type stuff, which everyone agrees is forbidden. But then you look at the next sif, which is based on another Gemara in Chulin, which says like this: Bias tinoik ve'isha, right? Bias tinoik ve'isha, avol b'she'ein nechush yesh simon. A house or a child or a woman. This means, to base this on the Gemara, and it means basically where a person has, let's say, built a house or has had a son. Right, his wife's giving birth to a son, or he just got married, right? He's not allowed to, if subsequently, after these good events, these positive events in his life, something happens where he's like engaged in some sort of business deal afterwards, okay? He's not allowed to rely on them in terms of divination, but yesh simon, there is a sign. It's just a nice sign. If he's successful afterwards, it's a sign that he's likely to carry on and be successful. Okay, but if he's not, then if he wasn't successful immediately after in whatever enterprise he was involved in after these events, then he should be concerned that maybe he won't be successful going forward. Now, I agree, it's a little bit of a fine line in understanding what the difference is. The Gemara is saying it seems to be saying that you're not allowed to, it could be the difference is you're not allowed to sort of divine from the beginning, from the outset. You know what I mean? And sort of say, well, this is happening to me, therefore, I'm doing these things and therefore I'm going to do X, Y, Z. But he can take it as a good sign if at the end of the day, after he has these good events in his life, these positive things, he then is successful on the next business deal he does, he can take that as a good sign. The Ramah adds, if he's successful 3 times afterwards or not. The Chaim similarly says it's allowed. This is mentioned elsewhere in the Gemara. This idea of saying to a child, tell me the posuk that you just learned in Cheder, in school. You say that, and if he says something, you can take that as a sign, says the Ramah, maybe it's okay to take that as some sort of sign. Now this, we know, the essence of this idea is what's known as the Goral Hagra of the Vilna Gaon. Famously, others, Bari Levine famously used it. For those of you who know the story, we don't have time to tell the story now. He used it in Yerushalayim to identify the kvorim of a group of, I think, soldiers who were murdered or Irgun fighters. There's a famous story. He used the Goral Hagra. It basically involves searching through a chumash in particular ways and looking at psukim and finding out, what the significance of those psukim are. Okay, so this is the essence of the idea. But then the Ramah brings to these 2 opinions that we just learned. Yesh omrim, some say some say the person is allowed to make a sign with something that will come in the future. Like Eliezer Eved Avram and Yehonasan did. That is the opinion of the Ravid and the Radak and others. Yeah, that on the contrary, you see from Eliezer, that's how he behaved. That's how he acted. So it must be okay to act in that particular way, to make a sign with something in the future, as Eliezer did. But the Yesh Osrin, some say it is not allowed. Some say it is forbidden. Now the Shach here, the question, of course, is it's a very unusual remark, because the Ramah brings the 2 opinions. The Ramah brings the 2 opinions. For those who are just joining us, we're just finishing off the share. Just give me a minute or 2, and then we will just be finishing off. So basically, the Ramah brings the 2 opinions here. He doesn't say which opinion he follows. The Shach says that mashma das rava poskim, it implies that the opinion of the Ramah and the poskim is that even to do an action on the basis of some velasid and to rely on it in the future, he's going actually on this idea of asking a child what posuk they had learned or whatever, is allowed, because it's a bit like a nevuah, it's a bit like it's a little bit like a prophecy, because it's a child. Now the thing is that the Ramah doesn't end there. He says, someone who goes with complete wholesomeness of Hashem and trusts Hashem, chesed yisovevenu, kindness will surround him. So the Ramah brings both opinions that we've seen, but he doesn't reach a clear conclusion, but he does conclude by saying that the way to live our lives is with confidence in Hashem, right? He's implying, it would seem, that it is better not to follow those signs at all. Very unusual Ramah. He brings the 2 opinions, then he says, someone who follows the path of Hashem, like it says, Tomim Tiyam Hashem Lekecha, which it says after the Oinin and Menachish, yeah? One should not, you shouldn't get involved in these type of signs. One should follow Hashem between. Look at it. Aaron, sorry, you're going to have to mute because I haven't, whatever, I'm the co-host here. But basically, if you look at the final piece, which we don't have to go through, look at it yourselves, basically the Haskama of Rav Shach to if you want to know more about this whole subject, then get that book, Faith and Folly, the Occult in Torah Perspective, where he deals with all sorts of things and superstitions and all this whole type of area where there are issues and where it's not to be concerned. He talks there about the concern about people spreading things that have no basis. There are things that have basis, but there are things which have no basis at all. And therefore one has to be certainly very careful in this area. And the conclusion of the Ramah is, one who relies on Hashem, one should have the tachon in Hashem, and kindness will surround him. Right, there you go. Thank you all for joining. As I said, a brief overview rather than specific guidance on particular circumstances, but hopefully of interest.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good
Great
luck.
pleasure. Great pleasure. Thanks for joining. Okay, good luck. I think those are some people who are staying or joining. Here we go.
Do you want to get your